Thank you very much. Thank you, and welcome to this evening's conversation with Salman Rushdie. I want to just begin by explaining that in March of 1992, I interviewed Mr. Rushdie for the first time. It was near Dulles Airport. I had to meet a stranger at a hotel bar who would take me to his secret location. I'd know him by the fact that he was carrying a Wall Street Journal. We had a lengthy interview by my standards, and I went back today to read what Salman Rushdie said in that interview and what I said in introducing it. And I realized that what I wrote 20 years ago is equally true today. Here's what I wrote. There's one thing I'd like to say about Salman Rushdie before anything else, and that is that he wrote Midnight's Children, a brilliant novel about India that had me in stitches several years ago. For that book alone, I would want to interview Salman Rushdie and would probably even go to some out-of-the-way hotel and meet some designated intermediary and then go somewhere else to do it. Needless to say, Mr. Rushdie is no longer famous for simply writing good novels, and his popularity is not the reason for such bizarre arrangements. He is famous because his later novel, The Satanic Verses, was deemed blasphemous by the late Ayatollah Khomeini, who issued a religious edict, a fatwa it's called, condemning Salman Rushdie to die. Since then, for the past 3 years, he has been in hiding, in Britain mostly, protected there by the security police. So here's what you told me in the interview. In 1992, he said, I really think that before this year is out, this thing will be over. Your pseudonymous alter ego, Joseph, Anton Joseph, lived on for quite a while longer.
I was just 10 years wrong.
Just 10 years wrong. Yeah. What was it like being frustrated, thinking this thing was about to get settled, the foreign office could work something out, and then being dashed all the time?
I mean, I think that the problem of how long it went on, it's very difficult to write about duration. It's very difficult to write about the fact that it wasn't that there were people shooting at me through the window. It wasn't, it wasn't dramatic. It was just this sense that it was never going to end. It just went on and on and on, which is why I use somewhere in the book this image from Borges, the Argentinian writer, where he talks about the Pampas in Argentina. And he says, this is something, you can't take a photograph of them. If you take a photograph of the Pampas, they look like a field. That's it. The only way you experience them is by traveling through them. And then they just go on and on and on and on and on and on, and they're always the same. And they go on, and they're always the same, and they go on and on and on, and they're always the same. And that's what it was like. It was like being in that situation of a situation that just endlessly went on. And
during that time, you could not live in your own home.
That's
you
right.
lived in the company of the police.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people thought that I was in sort of isolation somewhere, but actually it was the opposite of isolation. I was living with 4 enormous men with guns.
Yeah.
The word close friends. I mean, we became quite close.
Yeah.
But it was sometimes the problem was not isolation, but claustrophobia.
Yeah. And you managed to write in these circumstances?
Eventually, up and down, yeah. I mean, I think the thing that saved me was that I'm a novelist. I think if I'd been a playwright, supposing the Satanic Verses had been a play, or a movie, if I'd been a movie director, it would have been virtually impossible for me to continue with my profession, because of difficulty of getting a play put on or a movie made. But writers are used to sitting in rooms and staring out the window and wondering what the hell to do.
There you are.
So in a way, I was trained for this.
What you said about the Borges' image of the Pampas, the never knowing when it's over. Yeah. It reminded me of a sensation in New York right after 9/11, which was, with hindsight, we can say there was a moment when we knew that had happened. Yeah. But for a couple of days, we didn't know. There could be another plane hitting something. Something could go on. One doesn't know when these things are over. There are many ways in which what you experienced seems to foreshadow things that we all came to experience.
Well, I mean, that's, you know, that's what I very strongly came to feel, that what happened, the case of the Satanic Verses, was a harbinger, you know, it was a prologue in some way. And I think that's one of the reasons why it was so often so badly understood. When it first, certainly in the West, why it was so badly understood, because we had no narrative to fit it into. You know, it seemed to come out of nowhere. This sort of strange medievalist attack, you know, using accusations of things we hadn't heard about since the Spanish Inquisition, you know, heresy, apostasy, you know, these crimes. And people thought, what the hell is this? And then it was easy for people then to think, well, we don't understand this because it's all kind of weird and foreign, but he understands it. And so if he's upset them all so much, he must have done something really bad.
Yeah.
And it was very easy for people to do that because, as I say, they didn't have a larger frame. And what gradually happened over the next decade, next 20 years, was that people began to understand the larger narrative. And of course, the 9/11 attack, if you could say, is the main event. You know?
But let's talk about this idea that some of your detractors, I guess, and one thing we learn is that if we're ever targeted by a fatwa death sentence and are consigned to safe houses, every perceived flaw in our character will be published in the media in time. If your history
and
is
not
any
just
example.
flaws in our character, flaws in our appearance too.
Yes, everything. Well, it was argued, look, you wrote daringly about an area where, given the state of leadership in Islam in 1989, you were knocking on a door that, well, it was certainly possible some ogre would come jumping out of it. You pays your money, you takes your chances.
Yeah, well, that's a plausible argument, isn't it? Except that it seems to me, one of the greatest things about the history of literature is that writers have always taken on ogres. You know, writers have always, in every country in the world, taken on tyrants and pointed at them and called them by their name. You know, that when Mandelstam wrote his poem about Stalin, he knew perfectly well who Stalin was and what he was like.
Yes.
You know, Lorca knew who Franco was, you know, etc. I mean, the history of literature is of poets and artists, writers, standing up and telling the truth about tyrants to their face. And it's one of the noble things about literature. To say that that's what you mustn't do is to diminish, I think, what writers have done.
That we have a stake in the writer of fiction feeling defended in being courageous and taking on ogres.
Yeah, I mean, Shelley who said that writers are the unacknowledged legislators of mankind, which may be putting it a bit high.
Right.
But then he's a romantic poet. You know, but I think it's that speaking truth to power, you know, that business of saying, I don't care who you are, here's what I think of you, is a good thing.
But you were speaking truth to power in a very important way. It's the imagination of the artist being free to speak truth to power. An election wasn't going to depend on your getting this scoop. You weren't going to call out the government for its lies. It's something very different from that.
Yeah, I mean, also, you know, the Satanic Verses wasn't even primarily a novel about Islam. It was, you know, the most of it was a novel about migration. It was a novel about people coming from the Indian subcontinent and settling in England in the 1980s and the consequences of that. And in the middle of it, there's this dream sequence. You know, there's this dream sequence in which there's a prophet not called Muhammad inventing a religion not called Islam in a city not called Mecca. And this is a dream, and it's a dream in the mind of somebody who's going insane. Now, this is what we in the trade call fiction.
Yes. Yes, that was...
I mean, that would be the technical term for it. But instead, I mean, one of the strangest accusations of all the strange accusations that was leveled against me, but from quarters of the Islamic world, I mean, it was as if there's a suspicion about fiction itself. But, you know, fiction was being proposed as being something which conceals the true motives of the writer. So, whereas most